Consistency, I mean, it's really the only thing that matters, right? It was the thing that was missing and then found. It is the singular most important thing, right? Consistency is absolutely the thing that the elites have down so well, and amateur athletes often struggle with, because we all have real lives that we have to fit our training around, and that might involve moving house, getting a new job, going on holiday, which break up that consistency and make it so much harder to progress steadily. Whereas I know, certainly for me, and I see it in all these other people, my colleagues and friends, and the people who I've coached and have used the app, so all of these different people, the most successful ones are the most consistent in their training, for sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Josh Sambrook today on the Running Effect podcast. And today's conversation was absolutely fascinating. I speak with Josh, who went from running 3:20s in the marathon to 2:28. And he did it all, in my opinion, using the most unorthodox training method that I've never heard anyone on this podcast use. And so today's conversation was really interesting back and forth around the subject of training, and more specifically for the people out there who have busy lives, have families, have jobs. Running can't be their top priority, and that was the case for Josh. How to maximize the time that you spend in training for the fastest result as possible on race day. And that is where some of Josh's philosophies around training come into play. And he actually built an app around these training philosophies, which we also get into. And so just an overall fascinating discussion where we break down Josh's training philosophy, his training, his journey to a 2:28 marathon, and building his app Kaizen that we discuss in today's conversation. If you're passionate about maximizing your training and maximizing what you put in, today's conversation is absolutely for you. I'm confident you're going to walk away from this one with some tools that you can directly implement into your training to ultimately get faster results on race day and potentially spend less time than you're currently spending to get those results. And then I just mentioned a second ago that Josh is a co-founder of an app called Kaizen, which a lot of our conversation centers around today. And Josh was actually gracious enough to give you guys a 2-week free trial. I've left a link in the show notes to download the app, and the code for you all, it'll also pop on the screen here, is Run Effect, effect with an E, so RUNEFFECT, Run Effect, to unlock an extended 14-day free trial. So if you want to try out the app and see how it can benefit your training and ultimately racing, you can try it 14 days risk-free, cancel at the end of the 14 days if you don't see value in it. But I'm confident you guys will see value in it. It's really unique. I've actually been using it myself. You download the app, I connected it to my Strava. It analyzes all my training in a really cool way. I set a goal race date, goal race time, and it spits out a remarkable training plan that meets the demands of my everyday life. And it's a really unique app that I'm excited to use in the coming weeks and months. So thank you to Josh and the team over at Kaizen for that 14-day trial for this community. I hope you guys enjoy using the app if you ultimately decide to give it a try. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with Josh. I really appreciated it. And it was just a really fun discussion. And I'm excited for you guys to listen. So I will stop ranting. I will let you guys get into the wisdom of the man, the myth, the legend, Josh Sambrook. Ladies and gentlemen, all the way from across the pond in Berlin, I had ancestors there at some point. I'm German. They would call me Schluter back there, probably. A man who's way faster than I'll ever be, and doing so with very unorthodox training methods. Josh Sambrook, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, and it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Before we dive into a lot of the things that I'm keen to dive into with you, I want to set the stage kind of for your running journey and career and trajectory to get to this point. So when were you first introduced to the sport of running, and what's your journey and progression been like since?
Well, I'm lucky enough to have always been a runner. So from the age of about 12 or so, probably maybe even a little bit younger, I was doing kiddie triathlons. So we're talking a 400-meter run or something off the back of a 100-meter swim and a 2K cycle ride. But I first started running in earnest when I did my first marathon aged 17. So a younger entry into marathon running than most people. In fact, I did have to lie on the entry form because technically you're not meant to do you're not meant to be racing marathons until you're 18. But my first one was a pretty local event where you just had to accidentally write the wrong date of birth down, which was not a problem. And then here's a fun fact. I think I was the youngest participant in the Berlin Marathon one year. It was
Wow.
the day after my 18th birthday. So it's possible that there was someone whose birthday was on the day, but pretty unlikely. So I think I was the youngest person that year.
Super curious. Why do you think you got into running at such a young age? It doesn't sound like you were forced to or even had too much outside influence, but that there was a real desire to be a part of the sport. What do you think was behind that?
I just love a good challenge, I think, and it really seems like such a wonderfully direct challenge. You get out what you put in, and it's just fun. I've always loved doing different sports, and it seemed like a really natural progression to go from these triathlons and cross country at school, that kind of thing, into doing a marathon. It seemed back in this is 13 years ago now. It seemed like the obvious progression. The ultra scene, the trail running scene was a bit smaller back then, and didn't seem like the obvious thing to do, whereas the marathon was just the next step up after doing school level cross country.
You mentioned you love to challenge yourself, but I'll play devil's advocate here. You could play soccer or get in the weight room or do, a 50-mile ruck. What makes running special? And you can speak from your present day experience being in the sport for many years. What do you think makes running stand out from other sports for yourself?
Yeah, for me, it's that direct input output. I really love that you get out what you put in. So with a team sport or a skill based sport, there are so many different, slightly disparate aspects that contribute to your success in that sport, whether you win that game or that match or whatever it may be. And those can be really rewarding sports. I've done my fair share of them. I did fencing and diving and gymnastics in my youth. Never particularly good at any of them. But then running has this fantastic, you can do the training and then you can assess your fitness and know how fit you are. And then on race day, you're just collecting that result that you've earned in training. And I really love that. I find that being able to put in hard work in training, or rather significant time and effort into training, and then getting a really direct result and knowing you, the only way to succeed is to have earned it in training. Fantastic. And it really is that it's the only way to do it. If you've got a good race result, the only way to have achieved that is to have put real dedication into training, and that is then you can wear that race result like a badge of honor. I think that's fantastic.
Totally, man. Completely agree. I was reading, and I could have my facts a little off here, so please correct me if I do. But I believe after some of those early marathons, you built yourself a training system before Kaizen, which we'll talk about in today's conversation, which helped you to take some big leaps in the sport. I don't know if it's just me, Josh, but I can't say if I was to hit a wall in my running that I would go out and create kind of an app or a system to help me. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that really comes from the fact that I had plateaued in my own racing. So I set out with this. I had done 3:24, 3:26, something like that in my first marathon, and then came along to Berlin. A young 18-year-old did 3:06, something like that, and plateaued around there for a few years. And I was really struggling through the marathons at this point, and couldn't really work out why I was not getting much better. Turns out it was because I was just not training. It seems phenomenally obvious now, but back then it didn't seem obvious. So I was at university studying sports science and physiology and kind of trying to work out how I could be a bit better and whether I could actually be quite good at a sport for the first time in my life. And that's when I started to apply some of the things I'd been, learning in my studies and some other research papers I'd come across to my own training. Realized that I was kind of onto something, and I was able to make some pretty good progress on that journey. And I also pretty nerdy. I really love a good graph, so I had built this system that kind of plotted my progress, and I ran with it then. So it wasn't a night and day thing, but it was more of a, just peeling back the possibilities a little bit more with each race and month and training cycle, until I got to a point where I built myself a whole system, to maximize my training efficacy.
I'm fascinated, knowing we have so many resources in the sport, from books that are incredibly dense, like The Science of Running by Steve Magnus, to podcasts, to interviews with professional athletes telling, the reader how they train. I'm curious why you went the route of kind of creating something yourself rather than, I think, what a lot of people would have done, which is just pick up a, you know, formula of running by Jack Daniels type of situation.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, actually. And I don't know that I've ever thought about that in a massive amount of detail. It seemed like the obvious thing to do, to solve the problem for myself rather than having someone else solve the problem for me. But I think also probably contributing to that, I had been doing those more traditional things and not finding them as effective as I had hoped. So I had been training with a club and trying to structure my training, okay, badly, but with that more traditional approach, and had kind of hit a wall. And then layering on top of that the fact that I just really, I just really love the sensation of running. I love running so much, and I think there's so much to be said for just just running, just simply running in whatever way you enjoy. I think that's a really underrated aspect of running, that runs so often have this really specific structure. You're doing a specific run to target a specific adaptation, and the way that I, particularly back then, was enjoying running the most was just getting out there and enjoying nature, getting some headspace, having a chat with friends, that kind of thing. And I wasn't finding a huge amount of the traditional methodologies that tapped in and vibed with that enjoyment of the sport.
You've mentioned some of these key findings that you found through the process of going down some of these paths. What were some of the key things that you found that you feel like allowed you to take your running to that next level?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it was that training works, right? So I was doing these bit more than 3 hour marathons and training very sporadically for them. And then I really hit my stride when I was working in the city and living out in the countryside and I had a long commute to work. It was 18 kilometers, but I didn't have a car at the time. So I ran commute. Sometimes I got a lift part way, but for the most part, I was run commuting, running 18K into work. So that's 10 or 11 miles, and then running 10 or 11 miles home in the evening.
Wow.
Um, yeah, topping it up with a little bit of running at the weekend, but really running a huge volume, but super boring. I mean, not boring. I loved it, of course, but not particularly spicy or interesting training to look at. It's just 5 minutes a kilometer, so about an 8 minute mile. I think that is to work, 8 minute mile at home from work. Wonderful way to spend time, but not particularly targeted or specific training. And I was finding that this was the numbers were just looking better and better and better each day, each week, and the race times were improving, improving, improving. So training works is the first big thing I learned. But then also there are different types of training that work. So it's not necessarily about being tied to one specific training methodology or setup, but more about training in a way that suits you. And to use a historical example, I think it was I want to say Rome 1960 Olympics, where this is the classic example of different training methodologies, right? I think that the podium in the marathon, in the men's marathon, was like you had three runners all training in wildly different methodologies, finishing the marathon within like a few minutes of each other. And you had one person doing the more traditional, um, might not have been Rome. Anyway, I can't remember which marathon it was. It was one of the Olympic marathons around that time, where you had one person doing um, really short, sharp stuff, one person doing really long, slow stuff, and one person doing a mix of the three, and they were all within a few minutes of each other at the finish line. So I kind of took this and went, well, actually, what suits me and what works in my life at the moment is this run commuting. Keep it nice and steady, just just enjoy the distance, and that really clicked and helped me unlock quite a bit more speed.
What are your thoughts on consistency?
Our consistency. I mean, it's really the only thing that matters, right? It was the thing that I was missing, and then found. So it is the singular most important thing, right? Consistency is absolutely the thing that the elites have down so well, and amateur athletes often struggle with, because we all have real lives that we have to fit our training around, and that might involve moving house, getting a new job, going on holiday, which break up that consistency and make it so much harder to progress steadily. Whereas I know, certainly for me, and I see it in all these other people, my colleagues and friends, and the people who who I've coached and have used the app. So all of these different people, the most successful ones are the most consistent in their training, for sure.
Taking a little bit of a detour here, I'm trying to think what question I was going to ask you. Oh, I do remember. So in the States here, we have Thanksgiving tomorrow, and then we have, throughout the world, obviously the holidays, Christmas coming up next month. I think that's the time of the year where a lot of people struggle to be consistent. From your opinion, as a successful runner and marathoner, what would your advice be to those listening who are maybe a little scared, fearful of being consistent, getting the training they know they need to get done amidst the holiday season?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, or it can be really hard to get out the door. You know, the weather's getting colder and darker, and you've got potentially more interesting things happening inside. You've got family around. You might have eaten some food or potentially drunk some alcohol, which is, you know, sapping that motivation to get out the door. What I really rely on, and I think I'm very lucky in this way, is that the people I spend my time with during the holiday season are also keen for a run or two. But I remember being asked this years ago, like someone said to me, you know, what on earth motivates you to go out and do the same thing every day and kind of trudge through this even when you don't want to, when it's raining outside and the run is just going to be pretty dull. And for me, it's that if you have already put work into your training cycle, you've already put so much time and effort and sweat down on the table. You don't just want to give up today, because then you're throwing away all of that hard work you've done. If you're training now for a race in 3 months' time, 12 weeks, something like that, so we're talking February, and you've already done a month or two's good training, if you lose that consistency at one point, then you're scrambling to catch up. You're never going to achieve what you could have achieved. And that earlier stuff you did, you've kind of, I mean, not wasted it is probably a bit of a harsh word, but to a certain extent, you know, you don't want to let that go to waste.
Going back to your story of 10 miles in the morning, 10 miles in the evening, was that the majority? Like, give me some tangible numbers of how you improved off of that training, in terms of like from those 324, 326 marathons all the way down to whatever you got to. And was there any speed work involved, intervals, thoughts on those sorts of things?
Yeah, so the jump kind of went from about 3 hours down to, there was one or two races in the middle, but at the end of the day, it was down to 2:28. So a big jump over not such a short time. And actually, in that time, there was no speed work or intervals almost whatsoever. So I this is a really unusual way of approaching the problem of training, or the challenge of training, in that I had, at this point, I had built myself a pretty good system. It was a system that only worked for me. It was actually an Excel sheet that I was typing my numbers into by hand, but the system worked, and I was able to have such high confidence in those numbers that I didn't need to prove myself with hero workouts or particular speed work or anything like that, because I had confidence in this system. But there was just no speed work at all. I would do the running to and from work on a Saturday morning. I would go and do a park run. Do you have park runs in the US? I think there's a few, right, but not that many.
Not that I know of, but I'm familiar with them.
Yeah, so there are these for anybody listening who doesn't know what they are. They're this kind of 5K time run series. They're not quite a race, but nearly a race. Absolutely fantastic community event. Every Saturday at 9 in the morning, I would turn up to my local park run and run 5K hard. So that was the one hard run I did in a week. But I was doing so little of the speed work, and I was usually so tired from a week of big distance that I wasn't particularly fast over 5K. And actually, my 5K times were also not coming down particularly. I'd occasionally get a PB in the 5K, but not very often. So I think at that time, my 5K PB was like just a bit under 18 minutes. And then I went and ran this 2:28 marathon, which is a give or take a 17:30 5K. So my 5K, each of my
Well, how
5K
did you do
splits.
that? Not to
Yeah.
interrupt, but
But this is what
were you
happens.
taking EPO before the marathon, or?
Yeah, it's really just that it is just that I was so tired lining up on a Saturday morning, or not so tired, but so not fresh. My legs were not ready to work hard. So although I was giving it everything I had on a Saturday morning, I was working at really reduced capacity. And then you have a bit of a taper for that race. When you hit the race, you put on your race shoes, and it's amazing how quickly you can go. You're just never deploying that in training, and then all of a sudden, come race day, you deploy all of that fitness that you've built, and the results were really fantastic.
How much mileage were you running per week during that time period?
Just over 100 miles a week. So I was,
Okay.
yeah. And I think I find this really interesting. It's one of the big things that I think's changed in the running scene in the last 10 or so years, is that 100 miles a week, aged 22, would have been really high back then. I knew very few other people doing over 100 miles a week. And the ones that were pretty experienced, weather beaten athletes who have been around the block a few times. And I think nowadays you look at these younger people that are coming through running some really incredible times, and that's awesome to see. But I think the standard has shifted, and now there are more and more successful elite or sub-elite athletes doing times faster than me off bigger training. So that's really exciting to see. But at the time, it was pretty unusual.
That's crazy, man. And how old were you at the time when you were doing this sort of mileage?
Yeah, I was 22, so it was while I was at university around that time.
Okay. Wow. So super young. Oh, I'm fascinated by this. So fascinated. Okay, so during the week, were you doing any strides? Were you doing strength training, or was it almost purely mileage?
No, I woke up, I packed myself my lunch, and my lunch was my lunch was a loaf of bread, half with butter and Nutella, and half with butter and jam. Packed that in my backpack, ran to work, ran home. That's it. There was nothing fancy or extra to it at all. I was literally just, and it wasn't jogging. I was 5 minutes a kilometer. I don't think is a jog, and certainly over some of the more off-road terrain, and it's not slow, but compared to the training from other people doing 2:30 marathons, effectively a jog. I was just jogging to and from work, and that was literally it.
Wow. This is so fascinating to dive
Yeah.
into. But part of me wants to be critical, but I want to ask you a question. I know you've coached athletes. Is this a similar system that you've used with them? And if so, what have the results been like?
Yeah, and please do be critical. I like a good discussion. So
It's not even
don't.
that. It's just I love I'm fascinated by it because I've never heard anyone train like this who's running 2:28. So it's maybe critical is the wrong word, and more I'm very curious.
Well, yeah, no. Let's dig into it. Right, it's an unusual thing because I don't see other people doing this, and the it's the balance. It's actually what I would say is one of the big things that maybe is a bit of a hurdle for newer runners to overcome, or it's a paradigm shift, right? The traditional training plan model is one that structures your life around your training, because the way that most people build their training plans is to take what elite athletes do and scale it down to them. And elite athletes have the privilege of running being their job. So they can spend time on recovery, they can spend time on, or rather, spend time on active recovery, spend time doing strides, do really specific interval sessions. They have potentially got sponsors who are giving them gels and gear and all of these other things that make that journey to success a little bit easier. Amateur athletes don't have that privilege. For the most part, we're self-funded. You buy your own gels and shoes, and any time you spend training is time you're not spending with family, with your kids, doing your job, doing your weekly shopping, whatever it may be. We've all got busy lives to lead. So taking what the elite athletes do in all of this time and scaling it down is one effective way of training. Absolutely. That's the traditional training plan model, but it's not the only successful way. What you can do instead is go, actually, I have X amount of time and energy and money to spend on my training. Where's the best bang for my buck? Where am I going to get the most results? And I would make the case that for the most part, that is just by focusing on the key thing. You want to get better at running, run. Strength training might help a little bit, but would that time be more effective if it was spent running?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't disagree with you there. Can you speak to some of the athletes you've coached over the years and the results you've seen from implementing this training philosophy? Because I think a lot of people could look at your story and say, well, running's very individualistic, right? It just worked for you. You're the unicorn, right? So what have you experienced from other people utilizing this sort of training?
Yeah, so let's set the scene and say that after I had this sample size of one of really just me, I was able to, I found that other people saw what I was doing and were kind of, oh, friends and family, oh, can I have access to that spreadsheet, basically? So I started doing some coaching after that, digital coaching with athletes all over the world of a really wide range of abilities. And the really exciting thing was that I was finding this worked across the board. And the reason that this works across the board is not because there's something magic going on, but it's actually the opposite of that. It's that the problem of training is actually simpler than we often think of it as, is that running more makes you a faster runner. And there are many ways you can, perfect it or refine it. And you can do the type of running that appeals to you. The type of running that appealed to me was lots of running, steady, no intervals. That's not the type of running that appeals to everyone. Other people like to do different things. And when you work with that, you can build a training plan that allows someone to focus on the most important thing, consistency. We touched on that earlier. So then you've got a system that the system is then becomes, let's say, training type agnostic. It doesn't mind whether you're doing long slow running or intervals or hills or Norwegian singles or whatever it might be. It is able to assess the value of that running and build consistent training blocks that build that training load. And I was finding that this approach, rather than thinking here's the one right way to train, and if you're not following that one methodology, you're not doing it right, saying there's many ways to train, pick the way that suits you best, works for people across the board, whether they're training for 5Ks or marathons, or actually even ultras, by the way, but that's a whole other kettle of fish. And whether they are doing their first race or whether they're really high performers, the maths, the science, the physiology holds true. the same rules of training apply regardless of where you are on that journey.
I was just going to ask in terms of, and I think you answered it. So feel free to fill this out however little or much you want to. But does this philosophy you have mainly apply to just the marathon, or do you view it, across all the distances from mile all the way up to the ultras? Like if you were training someone for the 5K, would you have them do speed work?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question because at my heart, I'm a marathon runner, but the philosophy works for a really wide range of distances. So I was, we come from a marathon running background for me personally and at Kaizen, but actually the logic applies everywhere. Now there are some with some asterisks and caveats. That is, if I was training someone specifically for the 5K, yes, I would have them be doing some speed work for sure, and we can see that is important. We talked about my training before my 2:28 marathon before, and I was not able to run 5K as fast as I was able to run a whole marathon, and that's just not an effective way of getting the most out of your training. But the tweaks are probably smaller than I suspect most people perceive them to be. So a good way of illustrating this is maybe you look at the elite training that top runners are doing for different distances. And Safan Hassan is a great example of this. She's able to do training that gets her Olympic medals across the 5K, the 10K, and the marathon back to back in the same event. If the type of training needed for 5K versus the marathon was drastically different, you wouldn't be able to do that because she had the best competition in the world and was still able to land on the podium off the same training. She's probably an exception in the sense that, and obviously an incredibly talented runner, but highlighting there, and there've been a few other people that have done the same across maybe the 15 and the 5. Look at what the Inga Britson does. 1500 and 5K. The training isn't drastically different. You're tweaking at the edges, and elite athletes have the time and the knowledge and the coaching system to tweak really effectively at the edges. But most amateur athletes, you should be getting the basics down first before you start dealing with the details.
Okay. Man, this conversation is amazing. So thanks for doing this with me. I'm having a lot of fun here. I want to ask some clarifying questions. It's factually true that consistency is what yields the highest results. They've done tons of studies on that. How do you not be consistent? You're injured. How do you get injured? Studies show a high volume of it comes from speed work, whether that's too hard of a workout, introducing it too early, XYZ. For you, how much of your training methodologies come from the simple fact of you're almost playing against the downside risk of doing speed work? Because the upsides of this, like we actually wrote about this in a newsletter not too long ago. The piece was called The Hierarchy of Endurance Needs. Number one is high training volume and frequency. There was a study that surveyed 2,300 recreational marathoners. Weekly running volume is one of the strongest predictors of race performance. For example, those running about 50 miles per week were 25 to 32 minutes faster than those running 30 miles per week, all else equal. Crazy. Second, high intensity training. In the same study, marathoners mentioned earlier, those who incorporated intervals ran 5 minutes faster than those who didn't. That's meaningful, but still secondary to the gains from volume. So I guess my question here is, it's clear the science backs you up in terms of like mileage and consistency is going to be what yields the highest results. But how much of that training philosophy comes from the mindset of, okay, if we're not doing too much high intensity training, we're going to be healthier, which means we're going to be consistent, which means we're probably going to have better results in the long term.
Yeah, super interesting. And that study put some numbers on it, but the crucial takeaway there, I would say, is that you want to do. The study was about marathon runners, right? Specifically
Yeah,
marathon.
correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
you want to be fast in the marathon. You've really got to run a pretty good distance, right? That's hard to get around that fact, and you can, if you can run fast enough, you can run a good marathon off a low distance. But lots of athletes are going to struggle to run fast enough and not also run that distance. Your warm-ups and your cool downs contribute to your training load and ramp up that distance. So although technically possible to achieve a good time off a low distance with high intensity, hard to do and avoid injury. And actually your two examples that you said there were, I believe you said, high intensity when you're not ready for it and big interval sessions. And crucially, it's the when you're not ready for it thing. Both of the examples you used were an exposure to a training load that the person is not yet adapted for, because it's not just exposure to high training load that injures someone, it's an exposure to a training load that they are not adapted to deal with. Because, of course, elite athletes are exposing themselves to phenomenally high training loads all the time, but because they've got years, months and years of training layered up, they can expose themselves to that high load and avoid injury. But then to come back to my personal experience, that's exactly what I found. I found that intense stuff when I was in my teens, intensity got me injured, and I also didn't really like it, but more likely to get me injured. Whereas I could afford to run a large volume and avoid injury and pick up training load just by doing more kilometers, bigger and bigger distances. Because that worked for me, it's not the only way, but it does seem to be what I've found works for most people.
Again, so many different paths I could go down. I'm trying to pick in my head which makes the most logical sense. I guess, what would you say to the people who, and by the way, I've run 2 marathons this year. One was off of 2 weeks of running, don't recommend, and the other was off of 20 miles a week of running, don't recommend. So I'm fully in your camp, man. I ran 3:14 off of the 20 miles a week of running. I was happy with that. I'm curious but I'm gonna start using Kaizen next race, and we'll see what happens with that. I think that'll be a fun little test experiment. And it wasn't. I knew that was not the way to train. By the way, I just had this marathon lined up, and I was so busy with work. I was like, this is the most that I can handle. So the 20 miles a week was not an intentional. I think this is best. I think that was stupid.
Oh,
Not
we've all
recommend for
been there.
anyone.
I've certainly,
Yeah.
I spent my life preaching about this, and I make that mistake not all the time, but I've made that mistake many, many times of lining up on the start line thinking, it'll be fine. I'll just, and then you get started racing. Yeah, it's a horrible experience.
Yeah, totally, man. It was a painful last 10K, but my goal was actually sub 3:15, and I did it. So I was actually quite happy with that day, given the circumstances. But if I had a full training block, my goal would not have been 3:14. So I made sure to switch the goal depending on how much training I had. But a lot of people, like specifically younger listeners, right, high schoolers, they can't handle 100 miles a week. A lot of them can't handle 40 miles a week. And so the load is so low that they can almost include a lot of high intensity training. That's where they're going to get a lot of, the benefit from. And we're specifically talking in high school, the farthest they're going to run is 5K in cross country. What's your thought for those sorts of athletes in terms of the ones who, their bones are literally still growing. They can't run many miles without getting injured. So it almost makes more sense in their mind or their coach's mind to do a little more high intensity training. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different kettle of fish there when you're talking about someone who's in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s versus someone who's a teenager and still growing and developing. And I would actually say that this is the same reason that you're not meant to be doing marathons before you're an adult, right? Because it's a pretty high load that you're not theoretically not ready for. I would be interested to know what the injury rates or whether there's any differences in athlete development from a younger person doing more intensity versus more distance if traded off appropriately. Because you can draw a curve, right? So imagine a graph with intensity on the y-axis and distance on the x-axis, and you can draw a line or a curve that's going to be equivalent training load. So, for example, to run your 3:15 marathon that you did, you could achieve that fitness either by running a very short distance very fast, or a very long distance very slow, or anywhere in between, and you can plot this curve. I would be interested to know if you, because for an adult, I can tell you that you can make this trade-off and you can slide yourself up and down this curve freely to a point that you enjoy and is low enough injury risk and allows you to be consistent. I would be interested to know whether that also applies to young athletes, teenagers, and high schoolers, because if you're trading off blindly without knowing how much more distance you can add by reducing the intensity, the ratio between them, that's different to doing that intentionally with the knowledge. So 100 miles a week would obviously be a huge amount, but maybe like, I don't know, pulling the numbers out of thin air, but like 50 or 60, if that allows you to slow down by maybe like 30 seconds per kilometer per week on average, like those numbers feel maybe about right. I haven't got my calculator here, but if you were to trade them off appropriately, would the injury rates and development, like athlete development, look different? I don't know. I'm not in a position to talk specifically about teenage athletes, but I'd be interested to know for sure.
Neville, another devil's advocate point for you. So you're a 228 guy. Do you think you have a ceiling by not doing, I don't know how we're going to define high intensity training, let's say intervals at marathon pace or faster? Because you look at the pros, again, if you have examples, feel free to bring them up. You look at the world record holders, the people winning world majors, and it's like, even Connor Mance in America here, you go on his Strava and that dude is doing 2 workouts a week in a long run. Sometimes his long run has pace involved. So you yourself, do you feel like there's a ceiling to this training philosophy where you almost have to, because we talked about the risks that come with intervals, right? It's apparently there, but the reality is professional running is a game of calculated risks, and it's really whoever comes out on top with the most calculated risks generally wins. Connor Mance is injured right now, right? He's missing the U.S. cross country championships, which is unfortunate. So it's like he sets the American record, keeps training like that. Inevitably, some injuries are going to pop up. So I feel like professional runners weigh the risk of, okay, I will have years in my career where I can't run at all, but the years where I can run, I'm going to be so damn good from this type of training that it is worth it. How do you think about that? And do you feel like you have a ceiling from just high mileage training?
Yeah, absolutely. If I was shooting for a national record, an Olympic qualification, I would be doing intervals at or above marathon pace for sure. But the thing that is limiting me at the moment in my life, the thing that's stopping me getting a PB, is that I don't have enough time because I'm really committed to my job, and well, actually, that's about it, really. If I could just run more, I would love to be running more. But the thing that's limiting me isn't that limit we're talking about is probably, to pull a number out of thin air, closer to 210 than it is to 228. And the reason I haven't got a PB in the last 8 years is not because I haven't been doing intervals. It's because I have not got the basics down to train more effectively. If I could have strung together a training block like I was doing back then when I was running really strongly and raced effectively, because of course racing is a whole nother challenge, and not an easy thing to get right, particularly in the marathon. If I could have done that, then I think I only need to worry about that ceiling when I've got a PB that's 15 minutes faster. Although I would also say, sorry, yeah, I'm going to asterisk that again and say that
Go for it.
that the intense stuff can also be fun. And also, if you're applied at the right point in your training cycle, no bad thing at all. It's a calculated risk, exactly as you say. And those elite athletes are rolling the dice on the most effective training cycle because they're looking to get every 1%.
Yeah, double threshold training is objectively high injury risk, and that theory was kind of born from lowering your injury risk. Why not do 5 by mile twice in a day rather than 10 by mile all at once? So I think training theory is evolving and developing. I guess to clarify your stance, because I think it's a fascinating one, you view this sort of training as, okay, this is for the people who have busy lives. Running is not their only profession and want to maximize the time that they're putting into their running. So you're basically coming up with these calculations of if you have 45 minutes a day or an hour a day or 2 hours a day or 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, here's the best type of training that will yield the highest results. Is that kind of how you think about this?
Yeah, or someone who just doesn't necessarily enjoy or have the access to those facilities, right? I mean, a lactate, let's use a lactate threshold session as an example, although the same framework could be applied to many different training methodologies. A lactate threshold session is attempting to pull a specific lever, you're attempting to drive a specific adaptation, but you're only getting that if you're training at the right intensity, i.e., just at or just below your lactate threshold, right? How do you know what your lactate threshold is? If you don't have a lactate monitor, it's really hard to know that. It is possible, but it's pretty difficult. The elite athletes are probably doing testing, like actual blood tests, like lactate tests, live in their sessions. And amateur athletes probably don't have the resources at their disposal to be able to do that. So why try and emulate something where you're not able to achieve, to copy the important thing you're doing? It's a rather than attempting to do a kind of poor imitation of the elite athletes training, instead do training that you enjoy, that fits with your life. It might be time crunch if that's the way you work, if that's the way your life is, or it might be exactly the opposite. It might be that you run for headspace and for, emotional clarity, or you might run with your partner, and your partner might prefer to run a little bit faster or slower than you. And how can you build a training structure, a training plan that fits for your life?
Amazing, man. This is clicking. It's making more sense. I love it. Let's talk about Kaizen, how you developed these philosophies into an app, and what you guys are building today and how it can help people.
Yeah, so Kaizen comes from this training. It's a direct child of the training system I built for myself back in the day when I was typing numbers into my own spreadsheet and watching the graphs go up, and watching myself build fitness. And after doing this, I'm working with a few hundreds of athletes across the globe, all different ranges. I realized that what I personally love running, and I want to share that enjoyment, that I had hit on a way to train that fits for amateur athletes and can be a really effective way to get fitter. And I want to share that with as many people as possible. And the way to do that is to make it as accessible as possible, which isn't one-to-one coaching, because you just can't reach that many people with one-to-one coaching. So an app is the way to go. But it's the same framework and it's the same underlying mental model, and a developed scientific model way of approaching the training in the app. So it's a I use it all the time for my own training. Every week I'm filling my donut. The main thing you interact with is this donut that you like progressively fill as the week goes along. But you have flexibility to fill that how you want. So how does the app actually look? Well, you've got a weekly training load target provided for you according to your current fitness, your training history, and your goal. At the start of the week, you're given this training load goal, which is presented as a distance goal. So I woke up this Monday morning and my app said, Josh, you're probably going to have to run 98 kilometers this week to achieve your goal. And I'm still coming off the back of a bit of a cold last week. My first run on Monday was slower than the app expected. So it said, oh, actually, given the intensity, given the speed of that run and the amount of hills and the cross training you've been doing, etc., we're going to revise that goal a little bit upwards. So actually now the total distance you need to achieve, if you keep going at that intensity the track that you're on, you're going to need to do 103 or 105 kilometers, 110 kilometers, whatever it was. I can't remember off the top of my head. But that distance target adapts according to the running you're actually doing.
I love it. And to add some context and clarity from my own personal experience, it's cool. You download the app, you quickly sign up, and you connect your Strava if you have Strava, and it kind of analyzes all your training that you've done recently and puts it into your training upcoming. You can put a race that you have on the calendar. So something I'm eyeing is like potentially doing the Austin Marathon or half marathon. That's in January or February, and then it kind of works backwards from that goal. So I'm curious, how much benefit do you see in this app in terms of just transforming the running community, where I get asked all the time, which is why I'm really excited about this app. Like, oh, what should I do? Where should I start? Who should I hire? And this is a really easy way. It almost, like, I think a lot of people can relate to this. I'm sure you can in your coaching days back in the day. The communication piece takes so long for the coach and the client. Whereas this, you just plug in your recent training, plug in your race goal, plug in your race, the date of it, and it kind of does everything for you. And just like we do, I feel like we have these apps in strength training. We don't have in running. So how cool and meaningful is it to build this app? And I guess what is your goal with your other co-founder, Michael? What are your goals with this app? How big do you guys think it can be?
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, I want it to benefit as many people as possible. But I think the first piece of that puzzle is looking at what happens. So you describe the process of, as you download the app there and you plug in your race goal and it analyzes your data. But that's when the real magic happens for you, because what it does in that moment is when it's analyzed your data and you've given it your race goal, it knows really precisely where your fitness is at the moment, because you've connected your data and it's looked at your training history. It's analyzed your actual training in previous training cycles and then your race results. So it looks through your data and says, we found a race, be it a marathon, a half marathon, 5K, 10K, actually of any distance, and it looks at the training beforehand and it says, here is the race result we would have expected from that training. How close were we? And it refines it. And it does this for all of your historical races. So the more training cycles you have in the past, the more races you have, the more accurate that picture of your current fitness is. But actually, even if you don't have any races, it's still very accurate. I mean, we predict 93% of race results to within 5%. So it's like super accurate. But anyway, it's got your fitness at the moment. It knows where you are, how fit you are today, and you've told it what your goal is, your race date, race goal. So it through this model can tell the type of training you need to get to that race goal. So you can then draw a line between the two and then say, each week you need to grow your training load by this amount in order to go from where you are now to where you want to be. How you go about doing that is balls in your court there. You can do fast and short. You can do long and slow. You can do a mix of both. You can do different things on different weeks. And actually, the next thing we're doing in the app is layering in these different training philosophies. So it'll generate some suggestions for you. Working on that at the moment, but at the moment it is up to you how you would go about doing that, and you can plan your runs to get there, and then you know that by the time your race comes around, you're in shape.
Thanks for all that info. And you guys were generous enough to give us a code for our listeners to have a 14-day free trial. And I'll leave that keyword in all of the show notes so you guys can download the app, get a 14-day free trial, and appreciate you guys for doing that. And then after that, I'm really confident a lot of people are going to continue to use this. I'm excited to personally use it. And what's cool is you buy one-on-one coaching, can ring you up like $200-$300 a month, and this is like a third of that cost for an annual subscription. So I love this, man. I guess what's the future for it? You talked about some of those tools that you're making in terms of some of the different processes to make this app better, provide more value for the user. How do you view this app evolving, and what's kind of the development process looked like in terms of like when you guys launched, and then some of the things you're looking to do in the coming months and year?
Yeah, so we've come on a long way since we launched. We've never strayed from our kind of core goal, which is to help runners to cut the noise out and help people run in whatever way they enjoy most. That's like my driving mission. That's what I wake up and want to do. Is I just love running, and I want other people to love it too. And I think that people really can, but it can be a confusing journey. So we want to make it a less confusing, less injury prone journey on that road to getting the most out of running that you can. And then specifically, so that's been our journey so far, and specifically how we think about we're going to go about doing this in the future is that actually at the moment we're finding the feedback we're getting is that some people are happy to totally go it alone and have that blank slate each week of how they go about acquiring their training load, and they want to do it flexibly each week, because one week they might have loads of time, and the another week they might have not so much time, and they might be doing hill sprints on holiday one week and then running on the flat another week. And other people want a bit more guidance, so maybe not a rigid plan that doesn't let you deviate, but a suggestion, i.e. we've looked at your recent training, we know what training you have told us you want to be doing, so we know what reality looked like for you, and we know what your kind of training, how you would want your training to look, and we can, a bit like Google Maps routes you from where you are to where you want to be, exactly like that. We can say, look, this is what your training actually looks like. This is how we know you want to train, because you've told us how you want to train. Here's a suggestion to get you closer to where you want to be, not just in terms of fitness, but how you approach the problem as well.
Amazing, man. What's your elevator pitch for the listener today, who's maybe curious about trying the app? And again, can't go wrong with a 14-day free trial. Worst case scenario, you cancel at day 13 and it's completely free. But what's your elevator pitch to people to try it out?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a very unconventional elevator pitch. And I'm going to say that once it clicks for you, it can take, because it's a completely different way of training, it can take some understanding or some time to click. Once it clicks, I'm yet to hear of someone saying, I understood it, I trained with it, but I don't like it. Once it clicks, it doesn't unclick. So spend the time, get it to click.
Amazing, man. I would say I'm sold, but I was sold long before we started speaking with each other, and greatly appreciate all the insights and wisdom from your own training. There's certainly aspects of it that I'll be taking into my running, and really look forward to using the app further. Before I let you go, final question I ask every single guest on every single episode. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
Ooh, do you know what? And I think I might have it for dinner this evening. I've got a fantastic Dan inspired noodles recipe. It's kind of ginger and mushrooms and fried tofu with spicy noodles. It's really good.
Amazing, man. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for building an app like this. I always want to give people their flowers in this community who are building things that ultimately equip people with the tools to get faster. That's why we do the sport a lot of the time, and also just like make their running, their lives more integrated and more sustainable, enjoyable, all the things that this app is helping people to do. So I know it's going to be successful. It's been an honor speaking with you, and we'll have to run it back on the podcast. Appreciate you you taking my devil's advocate positions. I think it made the conversation more insightful, and also just wanted to do that too, because I love, you know, putting myself in the shoes of the listener and saying, okay, what would they think? What would they want to ask? So I appreciate you putting up with my pushback at times. I'm fully sold on it, and yeah, I really appreciate all the work you do for the running world.
No, thank you for having me, and it's been a really interesting, insightful conversation.